Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
I'm super excited to talk with her today. We're going to learn a lot. These are questions that you probably have pondered about when it comes to our environment. She manufactures products that are safe, healthy, biodegradable products for yourself, your body, and self-care, but also products to clean. The company is Aspire Colorado, AspireColo.com, where you can find her. And we're going to talk about our water supply. What happens when we flush stuff down the toilet, the drain, and all these products? Where are they going? What's actually happening? Julie is back with us, and she's the person behind Aspire Colorado. Julie Smith is here. Hey, Julie, how are you today?
I am fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, and we've referred a few times to wastewater. You actually have a background there in wastewater management.
Wastewater engineering and actually wastewater operation. And actually, it's both water and wastewater. So, yeah. Anyway, and it was when I was working at Coors. They have two water treatment plants, one for beer and one for the domestic water that's used. So, water that goes into the beers, the A water, the groundwater, and it gets treated with a completely different process than the domestic water that's used for all the cleaning and the employees when they wash their hands and stuff like that. And that's a normal standard drinking water treatment process. And then they have three different wastewater treatment plants there. One that takes the water from the city of Golden, which is, by the way, the number one first wastewater treatment plant in the state of Colorado, was the Coors wastewater. It used to treat both the brewery water and the city of Golden, and now it just treats the city of Golden. And then they have a separate plant for the process waste, which is 2 or 3 times as big. And then they have a pre-treatment anaerobic plant upstream of that. So I'm familiar with a lot of different kinds of water and wastewater treatment processes.
And I guess I'm curious with what the products that you manufacture. Was part of the inspiration your background in water treatment, wastewater engineering, and all of that?
Oh, absolutely. Because as I started learning, I got a master's at Colorado School of Mines after I joined Coors. I took a master's in water environmental engineering with water and wastewater focus. And I learned about all these products or all these chemicals that were going down the drain, and they're difficult to treat. They're just not common chemicals, things that are not biodegradable. And I thought, right away, I thought, am I part of the problem? And I started looking at what I was actually using and found out that most of the products that are out there have things that don't biodegrade very well. So I got into making my own.
So why don't we talk about where our water comes from and what happens when we, let's say, flush a toilet?
So let me ask you, because you'll probably answer the same as anybody, because people don't really think about it. Water and wastewater treatment are something that we expect, and it's Americans. And actually, it's not even something that you get automatically in all parts of America. It's pretty amazing. But think about what happens or where your drinking water comes from. What is your answer to that?
Oh, let me see. I know there's some parts of the country where it comes from the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say it comes from, well, let's trace our steps back. Where I live, we have a water authority, and it's my belief that the water comes from rainwater. It could reservoirs. It's treated, and then it's delivered through pipes from the water authority. I don't know if that's right. I know where I am, it doesn't come in all areas from groundwater, although I'm rethinking my answer here because where I am on Long Island for decades, there has been major concern with our groundwater because our breast cancer rate is, I think, 1 in 9. So that's impactful. There are some areas where, people say there's pockets here of cancer cases. and it's always traced back to groundwater. So I'm not really sure. You're making me think here. All right, so tell us.
That was a really super, super good answer there, Mister. I'm saying, I will say that because most people don't have, they just say it comes from the tap. I turn on the tap and the water comes out. That's where it
Listen,
comes from.
when I pay the water authority, I'm not writing it to my tap. So I'm sending it somewhere. So I would think
That's
that
awesome.
they're sending water from somewhere.
Yeah,
So what is
that's awesome.
the reasonable
And
answer?
so that's awesome. And really, it's true. They drinking, so they get sourced, drinking water gets sourced from wherever, whatever water supplies happen to be available in the area. New York actually has some pretty darn good drinking water. I don't know if necessarily Long Island, but I just, as far as how the plants are broken down, but they have really good storage reservoirs. Usually what you have is you have melt or storage someplace where you're collecting water from a river or a creek or something like that. In the case here in Golden, it's Clear Creek, and it comes down and it gets stored in a reservoir. And then from there, it gets drawn off, and to your point, it gets treated to different extents. Okay, so we have that part, and then a lot of water, drinking water is sourced from groundwater if there's enough groundwater,
Mm.
and or a good groundwater resource that's nearby. And that is a way that that's not personal care products doesn't taint the groundwater as much as in the West it's fracking is one
Mm.
of it, but mostly by and large it's agrochemicals, and that's a whole other subject, that's even beyond what I'm talking about. Other than I use all organic materials in my products, and the reason for that is to avoid creating a market for what they call conventional agriculture, which is using those agrochemicals, and they pollute the groundwater. They also pollute rivers, streams, and lakes, wherever the runoff is. Those are the main pollutants that are leading to these high levels of cancers and other diseases. Yeah, anyway. Okay, so great answer. And then the follow-up question is that we also tend to take for granted is what happens when we rinse down the drain. We wash our hands, and we use some soap for that. We wash the dishes and we use some soap for that. The laundry, take a shower, flush. Number one, number two. What happens with all that?
I don't know. I'm
There
going to
you go.
think, well, okay, there are many different um, views of that depending on where you live. So, in the areas where
Mm-hmm.
I am, there are sewage treatment plants. If you're in a what's called
Mm-hmm.
a sewer district, where it it goes to a plant. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there's
Excellent.
also when you flush, you might have a cesspool or two,
Yep.
and whatever you're sending in, out of your toilet and drain is going into the cesspool, and eventually it's just dissipating into the ground.
Yep. That's good. And another thing is kind of interesting about it is that when we flush to a wastewater treatment plant, we're just paying for, we're paying for that, right? And it's gone. It's out of sight, out of mind. But when we have our own septic system, which we actually have a house up in the mountains that has its own septic system, and then you think, and they tell you, when you buy the house, if it has a septic system, to be careful what you flush down there so you don't kill your bugs. And
Yes.
bugs, when I say bugs, I'm talking about the biomass. There's actually sludge that are well, they're not even all single-celled organisms, but there are multi-celled organisms in there, but all kinds of microbials in there that specialize in eating our waste, and they do really well with it. Our waste is actually extremely good nutrients for those if you have the right, we call it a culture, a bacterial culture, and they literally treat the waste. But if you have a septic system, you have to be very careful, because if you throw things down there like Clorox or some kind of acid or something like that, you kill off your bio, and lose your treatment system, and then have to pay for somebody to come in and pump some more bio in there and get it back started again. So it's something that you think about a lot more when you own the septic system, like any house with a septic system is. And that's going to be like something like in the 30 to 40% of Americans are on septic systems. Any place there's a farm or a small town or a house out in the woods like ours is, or a town that's too small to justify a wastewater treatment plant.
Mm-hmm.
So
How do you define, Julie, septic system? Is it just what I'm saying? You have a cesspool or two, and that's my first question. Is that what we call a septic system? My other question is, when that system is started, let's say it is cesspools, they put that stuff that eats your waste in there. That's infused in, that's put in there. Let's say I just had a house built, they threw the cesspools in, I'm good to go. Blah, 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 blah. They pour that stuff in to get you going, so to speak. Is that how it really works?
Actually, ish. Yeah, you're in the ballpark. You have to have a pump, but a septic system, septic in a wastewater septic system means the same thing as it does, say, if we have an operation and it goes septic, or something happens where they like nick say an intestine or something like that. It means that you have no oxygen, it's anaerobic, and it gets really toxic in like our bodies, right? You've got to go in and get that taken care of immediately.
Yes.
If something goes septic. But in an anaerobic, in a septic system, it literally means there's no air and it's an anaerobic treatment system. So the biomass that's in there, which actually you don't really have to start it with something. I guess sometimes they do, but really our own feces is full of bacteria that's really already good at doing that. So really that seeds the septic system, is just that first flush. It's just that you don't want to kill it off when you get it running, because then you got to pump all this poison stuff out of there. So you have to be really careful once you get it running. You want to keep your bugs happy, as they say in the wastewater treatment world. And it's kind of interesting because people just don't think about wastewater and what goes into it. So at home, if you have a septic system, it's pretty simple. Now, the downside of a septic system that's kind of outside the scope of this is anaerobic reactions produce methane instead of CO2 and water. So, and methane is 22 times as potent of a greenhouse gas as CO2. So that's kind of part of our way that we're polluting our atmosphere or creating greenhouse gas. But it's another story. Another thing about septic systems is that there is a longer residence time in there. So it is kind of forgiving with low levels of toxins, let's say, that it can treat them. In a normal wastewater treatment plant, what happens is all of this wastewater goes flying in through all these lines that that are piped from everybody's house. Wastewater treatment plants are usually situated downstream of the town so that as much gravity flow can happen as possible. And then there are pump stations in between the points of discharge that help keep it moving. If you've got, say, some low pipe or low areas, valleys in the town or whatever like that, then you have pump stations. Anyway, so that's what's going on upstream and downstream. And then, by the way, wet water treatment plants are normally located upstream of any town for obvious reasons, because you have your intake is usually a river or something like that that's running past the town. You can drive up I-70 and see that. There are about, that's another thing to think about. There are things just upstream of Golden, which is one of the, closest to the Continental Divide, upstream of Golden. I think there's 6 or 7 different towns that have drinking water treatment systems upstream of that town, and then downstream is a wastewater treatment system. And so you keep doing that, and then there's a stretch of maybe 10 miles of river in between the wastewater from the upstream town and the drinking water from the downstream town. So that brings us to our reuse that is coming up now in the West. We've got a lot of water scarcity going on. We have way too many, way too high of a population for the amount of water that we have available for that population. They're scrambling around trying to figure out what to do about it. And but a biggie is water reuse, and then you have this gag factor. Oh, we can't do that, and it's like we've been doing that for the last couple hundred years, people. It's just the only difference is there's about 10 miles of creek in between the wastewater effluent and the water drinking water influent. So even if so, then when we get back to a wastewater plant, in comes the wastewater, and then it goes through a series of processes. So there are all these tanks and pumps involved, and the tanks are, the purpose of those are either, they're usually to drop out the solids out of the waste that's collected and taken to hopefully to be taken to a composting facility so that they can be used for, because that's the best possible source, full circle source of use for wastewater sludge, is to send it to compost and use it to grow more food, because that offsets a lot of fertilizer, just a mind-boggling amount of fertilizer, which is a huge part of our carbon footprint. Okay, so you remove solids from the wastewater through a series of filters and tank settling and things like that. And then where you really treat it is where you put it into a tank with the biomass that I was talking about, which is the sludge. And the sludge eats all of the soluble waste. So it takes care of anything that's still all soluble carbons and the soluble ammonia and everything that came out of us and went down the toilet, went down the sink and whatever. And it you feed it air. In other words, you just you blow air into the water. It has to have air because the sludge breathes in air, and then it consumes the waste and it turns it literally into more air, oxygen, nitrogen, and CO2, carbon dioxide. And so you end up, or you use the oxygen and turn it into carbon dioxide and water. So now you've taken this nasty waste that should never go into the river and turned it back into kind of original components. And it happens in a period of about 24 to 48 hours. The residence time is really short. Now that's for normal food and number one and number two. Now, when we start throwing weird chemicals in there, like dyes and fragrances and petrochemicals that you see in these personal care products, when you start adding those, the sludge isn't quick enough. It can't handle that. It doesn't really do much with it. It might like move a little bit of it, but a lot of it ends up going right out the discharge into the receiving water. And then you have fish and wildlife, and you wonder why they're getting damaged. And then because they depend on that water, the fish have to live in it, the wildlife have to drink it and live off of it too, right off of the wastewater. Now it goes another 10 miles down to the next drinking water treatment plant. And the more complex we make it with what we flush down, the more difficult it is to treat. And currently, our water and wastewater plants use about 3% of our national electricity as it is. And so, yeah. So you can add processes to that. You can add what they call tertiary processes. They are extremely energy intensive, and they obviously add to energy and they add to cost to try. You can make perfect water. That is feasibly possible. But the best place to not have those toxins in the water is just not put them down the drain in the first place.
So a couple of questions and points here. To your point about what you put in, you flush down. I had an issue with my cesspool in a house. I sold it last year. But they looked deeper into the cesspool, what the issue was, and you could literally see wipes, like baby wipes, lining everything. And the guy from the cesspool company said, you got to stop flushing that stuff down. I'm looking at stuff that's probably years old. And again, I get it. Sometimes kids do it. You don't even know they're doing it. They just get used to it. But even though it says biodegradable, blah, 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 it's just a bad place for it to be because it's going to live in your cesspool, septic tank, whatever, along the pipe work, and it's not going to break down. It's just not going to break down. All it's going to do is just clog it. I want to flip on the other side, our drinking water. What is typically put in it? Are there minerals infused in it? I remember back in the day, fluoride was put in our drinking water, and that was a whole big thing. Hey, it's great, it's great for your teeth, fluoride. Is that practice done at all nowadays? And what is put in our drinking water?
Oh, it may be put in some play, and it may be in some drinking water. I know the Coors process didn't have it. We have fluoride in our water anyway. So I think that's kind of a little out of date. I'll just say
Hmm,
that. But
okay.
as far as the most drinking water processes, they're all about clearing up the water. So you have filtration, and then you basically that's it. It's just whatever it takes to clear up the water, flocculation, which is then you do add chemicals to the water to get super fine particles to gather together into clumps, and that's called flocculation, and it simply makes them easier to filter, and it doesn't leave any residue in the water.
Okay.
Now and then they chlorinate the water, and that's to disinfect it,
Ah,
and mostly they chlorinate. Now, not always. Some
mm,
plants are doing other things, like with peroxide. At Coors, that was the difference between the two processes. The conventional domestic water was chlorinated, or it still is. And just because I'm not there doesn't mean they're not doing it, but it's chlorinated. And then for the water that was the spring water that's used to actually make the beer, the difference in the process was that water is ozonated. And that brings up, and the reason they do that is to not have the byproducts, they're called chlorine disinfection byproducts, that can that you'll have just you will end up with those in a water that's chlorinated. And that's because some of the chlorine will react with some of the organics that are in the water, that are naturally in the water, or that actually are left over from the upstream processes. So before they ever even came into the plant. So you'll have some of that. We actually just use a carbon filter to filter that out of our water. And it's really not that big of a deal, but still we do.
mm,
It's like it will add like if you have an off taste in your water, a lot of times that'll be why.
okay.
But it's still a heck of a lot safer than drinking, say, bottled water, where you have weird plastic monomer residues leaching off the inside of the plastic. I think that chlorination is definitely the lesser of the evils by a long shot,
Wow.
and it's saved a whole lot more lives than it's harmed, I think, given the situation we had before we were disinfecting our water, when we had constant bouts with cholera and salmonella and other waterborne diseases that we no longer deal with. So
I will tell you this, Julie, I have not drank water from my tap unless it's been filtered through a refrigerator filter, right? Or some
mhm.
other
Yeah,
means in
yeah.
decades. In decades. I just do not go to the tap and pour it out and drink it. And it's only because of things that I've heard in terms of the area I'm in the groundwater, that it could be cancer causing. I
Mhm,
just don't take a chance. Now, does that filter in the
mhm.
refrigerator actually do anything? I don't know. I'd have
Well, you
to.
know what? I'm going to interrupt you and tell you it
Sure.
absolutely, totally does. The
Okay.
simplest way to get rid of organic residues in water is to run it through a carbon filter.
Okay. And that's
That's
what
the
that is.
easiest thing in the world to do. And the thing that annoys me about carbon filters is they come in these plastic casings that you keep replacing the Britas, and that's annoying to me. I
Wow.
actually am so stubborn that I take and break those up and put the spent carbon, in my compost pile, and then I recycle that plastic casing. I'm pretty sure I'm probably the only one in the country that bothers to do that, but that's the only thing. But really, running through a carbon filter will do it. And waste and water, drinking water treatment plants don't normally do that because that would be just unbelievably expensive.
Oh, sure.
And when you think about it, the water that you drink is a fraction of the water that gets sent to your house that you use. So, yeah, I'd say, yeah, if you're comfortable with filtering out, that's the simplest thing to do is to filter out of your drinking water, and then just use it as is for everything else. And but if a drinking water treatment plant tried to filter all the water, that would increase your costs way. Think about that.
Oh, I
Yeah.
can't even imagine what, I know what the filter costs that I put inside my refrigerator. Take
Yeah.
that times, a billion in terms of size. We're out of time. What insight in terms of our environment, and, water is everything for us in terms of
It
living.
is.
And it is.
Mm-hmm.
You make so many great products. I want to tell everybody, Aspire, ASPIRECOLO.com. And you can see them there. These are products that are safe to go in our groundwater or in the ground where the water is. You've done the research. This is your life. If you want to change your life and do it more healthily for yourself and also your family, check out the website, right down to cleaning products. It's all there. And great point in terms of the plastic with the refrigerator filters. Yeah, it's almost it's almost an oxymoron. Let's be safe with our drinking water, but we're going to put it in this plastic that you're going to throw away. That's going to wind up in the ground anyway. That's polluting the water. That makes no sense. But
Thank you for that. Yes,
yeah,
I guess my final insight is I think bottled water and whites should be illegal.
the
I'm
white,
serious.
I saw it for myself, and yes, and in terms of bottled water, there is a place for it, but we all wonder
Yeah,
what
there
we're.
is. There are emergency situations, and there are places in this country like Southern Florida. You can't drink that water. I don't care. It's just bad.
Yeah,
It's just a bad quality water without filtering it first. West Texas, same thing. Yeah, there are places that have a really god awful, but for the most part, America has the best drinking
yeah.
water right from the tap in the world. And it's the safest, and you can clean it up a little. I mean, if you want to get rid of those residues, take them out. But it's a lot better than probably any other part in the world where you go to, like, if we go down to, well, we went to Tanzania. We actually, they had nothing but bottled water there for the tourists, and we're too stubborn. So I took a dropper bottle of Clorox and I treated the water right out of the tap, and we never got sick the whole time we were down there
Wow.
until the last day. And I thought, you know what? I've been here all this time. We stayed for a month. And I thought, I've been here all this time. You know what? I'm going to have a damn salad. And I ordered a salad at a restaurant, and I was sick for 2 weeks. I was so sick. It was unbelievable how sick I was. And it was water, they just cleaned the lettuce from the water out of the tap, and then I ate it and got that sick after a month. And so it was absolutely necessary. What that told me was they're not treating their water there to the extent that we are here, because that would never happen here.
Wow.
And you drink your water out of the tap and you don't question it. Yes, you might want to like get out some of those residues and make yourself feel better, but
Sure.
anyway.
Wow. And yeah, I mean, even to your point that, that's going to happen, could be anywhere, but, thankfully we're in a good place, but
We're very lucky.
we're very
We are
lucky,
very lucky here in America.
which is all the more reason to take care of our water supply and use products that aren't mucking up everything. Aspire, COLO.com is the website. Julie, thank you for all the info. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you too. Good to talk to you.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.